Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Now this is something slightly new for the channel. I want to be doing a book review and I want to continue doing book reviews. It's one of those weird imposter syndrome moments where I don't really feel like my opinion on books is really anything that people want to hear, but I'm going to share them. I am passionate about these books and these opinions, and if you hate them, so be it. If you like them, great. We'll find out together. But let's get straight into it. The first book that I want to review on this channel is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This book, I'm just going to come out right and say it, is fantastic. It is a fantastic sci-fi read. Now, I had a huge, probably around about a decade break of reading, just short of a decade probably, and I wrote Relics Dawn, and that sort of got me back into sort of the reading space, the book space. Started reading again. This is the first book that I decided to read. Don't ask me why. It's a pretty big, pretty hefty book to sort of jump back into the world of reading with, but I'm so glad I did because it's really sort of ignited that passion for reading again. I think it's a great book. It's such a good book. In terms of complexity, I wouldn't say that it's for beginner sci-fi readers. I have read sci-fi in the past. There are, and I'll be completely honest, there are some sections in the book where I was a little bit lost, and I had to read a couple of times to sort of understand, wrap my my small little brain around. But I wouldn't say this is for beginners. I'm going to be completely honest here. I wouldn't say this is for beginners. I would say this is for sort of middle of the road people that are used to reading sci-fi. But I do think that everyone should pick this book up. I think it's really good. I really like the sort of twist, and just a forewarn, I'm going to have to spoil certain story elements. I'm not going to spoil any story revelations or big plot points. I'm not going to spoil anything like that. I'm definitely not going to spoil the end of the book. But there's certain things that I need to talk about or want to talk about in the review that I can't really avoid, and so that's your warning. Very soft spoiler warning, we'll say. Yeah, we'll get straight into sort of the meat and potatoes of the review because I think this is a really good book and I've been wanting to talk about it for a while now. I think I finished it about 2 months ago now. But yeah, we'll get straight into it. So I'm going to give a pretty standard review structure. So I'm basically going to go through what I really liked about the book. Then I'll go through sort of some of my issues with the book, and there aren't many. And then I'll basically say whether I recommend it or not. And I think you know the answer to that. Let's be honest. So what did I really like about the book? I am a huge fan of speculative science. This book, and particularly speculative biology, and this book has that in droves. If you're a fan of speculative science, I've said speculative too many times, but if you're a fan of that thing, you're going to really like this book. Basically, the story is split into sort of two halves. You've got the human side of it and then the spider side of it, essentially. Again, soft spoiler warning. Soft spoiler warning. I wouldn't really class it as spoilers, but we're going to say it anyway, just in case. But essentially, the human side of it is quite dystopian. I would class it as post-apocalyptic. There's going to be people getting their pitchforks out at me saying that. It is definitely post-apocalyptic, but with a really fresh twist on it. It is more sci-fi orientated, and it's sort of like people going through sort of, being very desperate and sort of going through the sort of the last throes of humankind. And they come up against several roadblocks. I won't say what they are. One of the roadblocks in particular is a huge one. And the sort of attitudes that are shared amongst certain characters in the book are quite cynical. It's quite a cynical look from Tchaikovsky basically onto human nature. But I feel like the shoes of the main character whose lens you as the sort of reader view through and view the world through is really good. I think it's a really comfortable, nice way to experience the story. Again, just sort of because a lot of the characters that you interact with, or I say a lot of characters that the sort of main character interacts with on the human side of things are quite cynical. There's a lot of narcissism going on. Yeah, it's not a positive way of looking at human nature. But me as a person, I am quite a cynical person. I don't view the world and people through rose-tinted glasses, and I think that this sort of take on it is quite nice to see, and in my opinion, quite realistic. which, you know, take that as you want to. But then there's the spider side of things, and the spider side of things is where it really gets interesting. That's where most of my sort of, you know, attention and sort of wants to read on really sat. So the spiders essentially go from being very primitive all the way through to sort of having a more advanced civilization. And I absolutely loved all of that. I think that was so good and so good. It was so interesting to see and sort of explore. And you can see the sort of spiders going through several of the milestones that humans went through. Although they're quite analogous, they are separate because obviously the spider civilization is very different to human civilization, especially their architecture, as you might imagine. But the milestones that humans have gone through and the spiders in this book go through are quite analogous to each other. So it was really nice to see that and sort of draw those parallels. I might have been making them up completely. It might be my interpretation, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. And that's the beauty of reading. You can make your own interpretations of what the author have put down on the page. What else did I like? I really enjoyed. To be honest, there wasn't a lot I really didn't enjoy. To be, I would say some of the characters are quite annoying, but that's just personal preference, if anything. The world building in this book is fantastic. So essentially, like I mentioned already, there's two halves of the book. You've got the human half and the spider half. The world building on the human half is more backstory and sort of explaining sort of why the humans are where they are and why they're as desperate as they are, which is really, really interesting actually. And then the spiders, you obviously go through their history with them, but the world building, the actual world that they live within, and they're building the society within, is really interesting. There are mentions of lots of other animals and fauna on the planet, and sort of and this is a potential spoiler warning, but I don't think it is really. Basically, there's a virus that's sort of responsible for a lot of it, including the spiders' sort of rise, if you will. And there's a lot of mentions of sort of how that virus has interacted with other species, and particularly there's one where I think it's shellfish, and it's some sort of shellfish. I think it's mantis shrimp. I can't remember. But it mentions them, and I really, really wanted to explore that. And I think that's the cornerstone of great world building. It sort of shows you a little tantalizing piece, and as the reader, I'm like, I want more of that. I want more of that. I want to see that more. And obviously, it's not within the scope of the book. The story is not focusing on the shrimp, it's focusing on the spiders. But again, it's just that great sort of world building that Adrian Tchaikovsky has sort of created and crafted. And I think it's really good. And obviously, world building should make you more. One, the world has to be believable, but two, it should also inspire curiosity, make me want to see that, explore this, explore that. So I think that's a huge plus in this book. Really, really good. Now, what I will say is I think the world building sometimes, I feel like, and this is just my opinion, and I'm sort of skipping ahead a little bit to the negatives, but I feel like with the world building, just because I'm talking about it, I feel like there's some aspects of it where maybe some details were forgotten, and I don't want. It's a tough one because I don't want to make it out like I'm saying, "Oh, Adrian Tchaikovsky, you forgot some details that you wrote down." It's easily happens. It's happened to me when I've been writing, and I don't think that's what's caused it. I think it's more of just he's mentioned it because it's added flavor and depth to the world, and then sort of moved on from it. I don't think it was intentional in terms of, or not. I don't think it was not intentional. Is what I'm trying to say. I don't think it was just a forgotten oversight. But there's certain species in the book that are referenced really early on as being quite a big threat, and then they just sort of disappear. And there's not really any mention of them. There's a couple mentions of them later on, but it's more of just like passing mention, referring to the history. I think I would quite have liked to see sort of why they're no longer a threat, if that makes sense. But that's just me. That's just my opinion. But overall, I think the world building's fantastic. There wasn't really anything that I didn't think was in depth enough. It led me wanting to see more, and that's the most important bit. Every chapter I read with the spiders, I thought, you know what, I want more of that. So let's continue reading. Overall, in terms of sort of what I really liked about the book, to be honest, pretty much everything. The Spider Society was really interesting, and I think Adrian Tchaikovsky has a really interesting and unique take on that speculative piece in terms of how a spider society might arise and what that might look like. The human side of the story was interesting for the most part. Again, I'll get onto that in a second. Some of the decisions that people make are quite dire, and it's really nice to see, realistic sort of reactions from characters to those decisions and to those events. And it's all it's all really interesting, and it keeps me reading. But on to the things that I don't think were that good. And again, this take doesn't really take away from the book too much. I would give this a 5 out of 4. A 5 out of 4. I would give this a 4 out of 5. And the only reason really I can't give it that 5th star is because, and there are, I'd say, 3 main factors. And the first one being is that the pacing, I feel like the narrative kind of bogged down a couple times for me. And it's more on the human side of things. It wasn't. I didn't really ever feel like this on the spider side of the story when we were, when chapters were exploring the sort of the Portia, which is the spider, the interacting with the spider civilization. It's more on the human side of things, and again, this is just my personal opinion. I found it quite boring at times. I didn't really want to read. There was actually several instances where I kind of wanted to just skip the chapter entirely. But I knew that I would probably be missing out on key details and narrative points, so I didn't. The fact that I muscled through them is testament to the story as is. My attention span with this kind of thing, if I start to get bored, I find it really, really hard. It's like pulling teeth to get through it. The fact that I did is testament to this book, and I know that's a weird way of saying like this book is really good because I managed to get through the boring bits. I completely understand that that's quite weird thing to say, but for me personally, the fact that I managed to just, grin and bear it and get through those bits into the more enjoyable parts of the book is just the fact that the book is so good. The book overall is fantastic. It's just that the narrative at some stages does bog down. And again, it's more with the human side of things where, some of the characters are quite annoying. And again, that's complete personal preference. Not everyone's going to feel that way. But yeah, narratively, I would give it, if I was going to rate it out of 10, I would give it a 8. I'd give it a comfortable 8. I think it's good. It just has its flaws in certain sections of the book. But the second thing that I'm not a huge fan of is the overall sort of depiction of spider breakthroughs. So they go through several scientific breakthroughs, and I think they glossed over, to be completely honest. I wanted more. I wanted to sort of learn more about how firstly, how they discovered it. So there's an instance where the spiders basically learn how to use telescopes. They basically harness glass via a species of ants, and I thought this was really, really interesting. And they learn about extra sort of solar bodies, planets, moons, that sort of thing. I don't think extra solar bodies is the correct term. I think that's actually outside the solar system. Whatever, I'm bogging down in the details. But yeah, they learn about basically the moon and other sort of off-world entities, we'll say. And I'm really curious to know how I whether it was missed a bit of information as I read. That could be completely reader error. But I just wanted a bit more information there. I wanted a bit more. It was sort of very much like, oh, they can use telescopes now. Moving on, and it felt a bit rushed. If I'm completely honest, and I didn't really enjoy that. And also, now again, this is personal preference. I think that the way that the virus interacts with spiders, and their sharing of knowledge, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the way that they share knowledge, I just wasn't really a fan of. It didn't really make sense to me, and this is where I felt, and this might just be being stupid, I'll be completely honest, in my opinion, I just didn't think, for a really intelligent, rational civilization of spiders, I thought that the way that they relied on information sharing was quite archaic, and it didn't really make sense to sort of the scale and the grandeur of their society. But it's a minor point, really. I was okay with it, and it made sense for the story, and the spiders, the characters sort of reacted in decent ways, and they did address it at a certain point. So I think that is a very minor point. So other than that, overall, I would say that the book is still excellent, and again, I'm giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and I definitely recommend it. I think you saw that coming. Whereas this is a pretty messy review. I kind of wanted to just go at this off the cuff. I don't know whether you like that style. I think the next one I'm probably going to structure a bit better. But yeah, that was my review of Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time. I have read the next book, which is Children of Ruin, so I will review that if it's of interest. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate that you might not agree with some of my opinions, but that's what they are. They are opinions. You are more than welcome to your own opinions. But if you got this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.